Actually, each of your stories is very fascinating. From the last, from the time that like the attack on Zulu Top during Kargil. So he led the last attack on Zulu Top in Kargil on Zulu Top. After that, ceasefire was declared. So his claim to fame in Kargil is the last attack in Kargil. And after Tiger Hill and the other features had fallen, the enemy had kind of concentrated on this feature called Zulu Top, and that's when they had to be evicted. So he led the last attack. It was a very fascinating attack, which has never been actually recorded in the fashion that I have brought it out. Then there are also some very interesting operations because they used to also carry out certain covert pseudo operations. While there has been whisperings about these operations, they've never really been brought out on paper. Probably the first time such operations have actually come out, where some of these para teams impersonate as militants and operate to kind of get a strike with the militants so that they can kind of leave. So those are the fascinating bits which have actually come on, which have only been spoken about in very, very controlled term, but never been spoken about. But now that so much time has passed, and we can talk about these things, we should not talk about it. And of course, the last operation. There was a very interesting operation where there were three officers. He and there was another officer in 9 Para who got the Ashok Chakra called Arun Jasrotia.
Yes.
Again, very brave and a very, very illustrious officer. So Sudhir and Arun Jasrotia were the same operations, and Arun died in that operation. So even that operation is, I think I did a fairly good job of that chapter. Where they both in that operation and he dies. And then, of course, his last operation in Fruda, where he himself died. There's incidentally a boy who's writing a book on Arun Jasrotia even as we are speaking. So he was very proud and privileged to share my book with him, and he said, so I'm keeping this as a reference for his book. But you must also know that, when you write stories like this, Sudhir Walia was not Sudhir Walia only because he was not a Rambo by himself. He was not a Superman, right? He was a human being like you and me. He had the same aches and pains like you and me had. He was a human end of the day. I have tried to evolve that. I have tried to deal with him as a young man that he was, having his own aspirations, having his own insights and his own aspirations for life. But I've also, so while I've done that, I've also recreated the men around him, at least some of them, who stood by him, who were with him through thick and thin. I've created their stories too. So I think that is why this book is so interesting because it's not only him but his entire team of people. There's a gentleman called Honorary Captain Mahindra Singh, Kirti Chakra, Sena Medal, who was injured with a spinal injury. He has a bullet injury in his spine, who's coming down for the book launch. He spent years with Sudhir Walia, another very inspiring man. Then there is Honorary Captain Mukhtar, Shaurya Chakra. So there are men like him who've been with Sudhir. And I've got all these characters in and I have created those characters around Sudhir. That is what makes the story so fascinating. So it is not only Sudhir. Of course, there is him and there is his daredevilry and his exploit and his leadership. There are all these other men also. Arun Jasrotia, like I said, Major Bhushan, Nirmal Dhaliwal, some of the officers, and of course the men who have operated with him. And that gives a very 360-degree arc to the story. And that's what authenticates the story.
Right. So why was Rambo as the name of the book? Was there in your mind from the start, or you decided on it after you finished it?
from day one, the day I wrote the synopsis. In fact, I called it Rambo. Even my first page, the first time I started writing, the first word that came to my mind was Rambo. That has stuck. It was the first word that I ever wrote. See, he was known as Rambo for his
Yeah.
daredevil by a small group of people, but they did nickname him that. And I think he, in the truest form, he exemplifies that word in a much better way than Sylvester Stallone could ever do. And it's also a very fascinating. It's a very fascinating name for a book. Uh, so, in all perspectives, I think it just fitted in well, and it shows from the kind. My book yesterday. I was looking at Amazon, and I was pleasantly surprised by my publisher telling me that it's become the number one bestseller in military encyclopedias even before it got released. That was very gratifying. So I think that name somewhere resonates and kind of captivates you, and you want to pick up and see what this all about. Why Rambo? So the first thing that comes to you is Rambo because of the Rambo that has become famous, but it also intrigues you to pick up the book.
Right.
If I had put in any other name, hero of so and so or tiger of so and so, all those things have already been used. And I didn't want something which has already been beaten. I wanted something which is absolutely new, captivating, gripping, and something which will make you reach out for the book. I think this just makes you reach out for the book. It's simple, it's crisp,
Yes, sir.
it embodies the man that he was, and it defines the book and the story. Sri Lanka. Sea, Sacrifice, and Blunders. Operation Pavan. Vavonia, October 1988. The humid, balmy weather lulled the young subaltern to sleep. They had left the brilliant blue of the Indian Ocean, the powder soft sands, and the idyllic palms 2 hours back. The road meandered through deep jungles now. Perched in the truck, Sudhir could see his senior, the captain in the jeep leading the convoy. Jolted out of his wistful thoughts by the sounds of automatic fire and the thump of motors from across the lagoon, Lieutenant Sudhir heard the deafening crescendo of 57 mm rockets fired in a shallow dive. Black smoke billowed over the treetops as an acrid smell hung in the air. Peering out of the army truck, he noticed the Mi-8 gunships circling like vultures. The Indian Air Force gunships were hunting the LTT in the tropical jungles. Suddenly exploding glass shards cut his face, the staccato sound of machine gun fire accompanying the rush of air through the shattered windshield. He eyed flashes from the deep undergrowth across. Holding up his arm to protect his face, he saw the driver's head jerk back, split open. The truck wheeled sharply, hitting a tree. Sudhir stumbled out, dazed, seeking protection against the truck. Fire! Fire! The captain's voice barked. Fire! Cocking the rifle, Sudhir fired randomly. The first shots hit a tree. Shoot those fucking bastards, not the fucking trees, the captain yelled. Studying his arms, Sudhir tried to aim for the flashes. Before he could fire effectively, the fight was over. The LTD tigers had silently melted away in the deep forests after the ambush, leaving a carnage. The air smelt of burnt tires, brakes, and spilled gasoline. The captain walked up and looked down at Sudhir, tapping him on the shoulder. This is bandit country. Think like a bandit. Always be ready to hunt and stop gaping like a tourist. Sudhir nodded, a lesson he would never forget in his life. Removing the cork with his mouth, the captain took a swig from his hip flask and held it out to Sudhir. Welcome to Vavonia. Holding the army issue flask encased in canvas, Sudhir wrinkled his nose as he took a sip of the sour smelling water. Worry about staying alive first, then worry about how to live, you bugger. Sudhir learned his second lesson in life, that too from someone who was barely a few years older than him. This is what war did to boys. It made them men. Much
Happening.
less than a kilometer away, men were still fighting and dying. The LTT had ambushed a company of Gurkhas on patrol. In the hand to hand fight that ensured heavy casualties had occurred, IF's lethal Mi-25 Hepta gunships unleashed 23 cannon fire, 56 rockets, and 500 kg high explosive bombs against the Tigers. A lone army Cheetah helicopter circled above, an air observation post picking targets and directing fire. Reinforcements were required to be flown in before dusk, so some Mi-8 gunships were diverted off in a quick lift-off, flying low over the jungle to pick up the soldiers of the Mahar battalion from their camp. They flew back into the battle zone, 20 fully armed soldiers on each sortie, with the Mi-8s setting up a virtual air bridge. The lost sortie brought in the tough men of the 9 para commandos. Bavonia was the headquarters of the 4th Infantry Division. It had earned a reputation as a red flag eagle div during the World War II. Bavonia also had the tactical headquarters of the 9 para SF. Soon it got dark, but the sounds of fighting went on till late into the night. So this is just a small glimpse of what has been doing. This is a
It's
stint in Sri Lanka.
yes, sir. Like you mentioned earlier, right? So then it transports you to uh, any reader. It will transport to the place where all this is happening. So going to be an amazing read, sir.
The Islamic Caliphate. कश्मीर रहना है अल्लाह अकबर कहना होगा. The sound of chatter filled Sudhir's ears as he walked down the once bustling street of saffron shops and dry fruit sellers. The air was crispy and chilly, causing him to pull his jacket closer around him. The pavement beneath his feet felt unyielding and hard. Small wet stones jutted out, scraping against his shoes. The street smelt of burnt wood, smoke, and kebabs. As Sudhir rounded the corner, a wistful smell of freshly baked bread drafted towards him from the quaint bakery. His watering mouth made him realize he hadn't lost his childhood memories. It brought a smile. Sudhir saw a familiar figure walking up through the crowds towards him. It's been a while, Sudhir. Aslam warmly shook hands. You look more Kashmiri now. I do, don't I? Smiling, Sudhir stroked his beard. I see progress. Sudhir looked past his glass window of an internet cafe. Fresh problems. Sudhir furrowed his brow in confusion as Aslam motioned him to follow. Aslam led him to a small tea shop. The cramped space made it impossible to avoid touching knees with the person across from him. The table was sticky, the chairs worn and creaky. Online radicalization from the internet. Aslam looked round. He leaned closer before muttering, These kids rushing to encounter sites, a safe passage to hold up militants, all subverted, fooled. Sudhir looked at Aslam with newfound interest. Aslam spat out, poor wretched kids. Gulping the hot tea, they stepped out to continue the conversation. Taking in the sensory chaos of hanging wires and narrow lanes, Sudhir couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia wash over him. This was Srinagar, he had to remind himself, not Palampur. The Wahhabis, the Tabligis, the Jamatis are competing in establishing madrasas, Aslam continued. They seduce kids from poor families. This, this Islamization is all imported? Aslam nodded. The text of Islamic studies is being radicalized. No need to go across to Azad Kashmir now. Everything is available here. POK, Sudhir corrected. Aslam nodded. Yes, POK. So what kind of influence? Sunni, Maududi, who knows? But surely Sudhir interrupted. People can see through it. Stop it. Ignoring Sudhir, he continued. Exhibitionist Islam, a Kashmiri rituals and Sufism killed by Arabic culture. He stopped and spread his arms wide. An entire generation of semi-literate zombies who identify more with Islam than with Kashmir. Why can't you stop it? An irritated Sudhir was abhorred by their lack of intent. Aslam ignored him again. Instead, he took Sudhir to the martyrs' graveyard in the Idgah area of downtown Srinagar. Come, See before you question, okay? He glared at Sudhir. Check this out. Aslam walked to two tombstones. One of the local separatist politicians seeking Azadi from India, and the other of his own murderer, a Hizbul Mujahideen militant fighting Kashmir's accession to Pakistan, both buried next to each other. So his mouth hung open in amazement and he stared in fascinated dismay. See, that's how fucked we are. A confused lot. We don't know fuck about what's happening. Taken aback, Sudhi's eyes widened when he heard what Aslam implied. New black shrouds have replaced Pakistani green flags as crimins to wrap martyred terrorists on their funerals. Sudhi's irritation grew as he heard Aslam use the word martyr instead of slain or killed. A minor detail, but it irked him. Although Sudhir recognized the complexity of the situation in Kashmir, he believed it was crucial to reveal the truth. Jihad in Kashmir is no longer about ISI, Pakistan, or Azadi, muttered Aslam under his breath. The words tasted bitter on his tongue. It's about the Khalifa. Sudhir's face was frozen in shock. Aslam's face turned crimson. You asked why we can't stop this? Who will stop this? You! He screamed at Sudhir accusatory. A stupefied Sudhir was too stunned to speak. Our politicians failed us. New Delhi failed us. Aslam breathily forced out his words. Sudhir had never seen Aslam so angry, so distraught. He chose to remain silent. The anguish we endure rips our souls. Aslam's voice trembled with emotion. Our homes are smoldering ruins. Our children's innocence twisted. The very essence of a culture fading into obscurity. To Delhi, we are merely sympathizers, and the militants think us as informers. Sudhir allowed his silence to speak. Aslam's words hung in the air like a shroud, and we can't do a fuck about it. His blazing argument, born of deep frustration, ignited like a spark in the dry chinar leaves. Don't just talk, be earnest. Either do something drastic or lose Kashmir forever. Remove Article 370? Sudhir asked suggestively, finding his voice. Grinding his teeth, Aslam just picked a rock and hurled it with all the might of his pent up despair. Aslam's rage drove Sudhir to stare at grave after grave, goading him to find the answers himself.